Ladies and gentlemen, we've all been there. Life gets busy, workouts drop off, stress climbs, and you worry, will I lose my gains? I'm here to tell you something backed by science, not hype. There is one vitamin that when consistently maintained at optimal levels for 30 days can dramatically protect your muscle mass, even in periods of inactivity. I'm Dr. Andrew Huberman, and today we're talking about how to shield your body from muscle loss using just one molecule, vitamin D. Most people hear vitamin D and immediately think of sunlight or maybe brittle bones, but what they often don't realize is that vitamin D isn't just a vitamin. It's a steroid hormone. That distinction matters more than you think, because when we talk about hormones, we're talking about powerful messengers that influence how your entire body operates, down to how your genes are expressed, how your cells function, and how resilient your muscles stay, even when you're not training like you used to. See, when vitamin D enters your body, it doesn't just float around like some background supplement. It binds to receptors in almost every tissue in your body, your brain, your muscles, your immune system, and especially in your bones. But here's the game changer. Those vitamin D receptors are highly active in muscle tissue and even more active in the neurons that control your muscle contractions. That means the presence of this one vitamin affects not only the muscle cells themselves, but also how your brain talks to your body. Think about that. Your strength, coordination, and power are not just physical. They're neurochemical. The nervous system activates muscles through motor neurons, and if those neurons aren't firing properly, your muscles won't engage properly. Even with the best nutrition and strength training program, without that brain to muscle signal, you're missing the critical link. And this is exactly where vitamin D steps in to act like a volume knob, turning up the efficiency and responsiveness of those nerve signals. Let's break that down a bit further. When you have optimal levels of vitamin D, your body produces more calcium-binding proteins, which help transmit electrical signals in neurons. Those signals then lead to smoother, faster, and more powerful muscle contractions. But when you're deficient, that system slows. The communication between the brain and the muscles gets weaker, slower, less accurate. You may feel it as fatigue, clumsiness, or just plain weakness. But on a cellular level, the body is losing efficiency. It's not just mental tiredness, it's biological misfiring. And what makes this even more important is that this act isn't reserved for elite athletes or people deep into performance training. It impacts everyone. If you're someone who's injured and can't move much, or just taking time off the gym, or even getting older and noticing that recovery takes longer, this hormone becomes a non-negotiable tool. Because even in the absence of full body movement, when vitamin D levels are optimized, muscle fibers are still being maintained. The hormonal signals stay active. The metabolic activity in muscle tissue remains elevated. In a real way, your body doesn't forget how to be strong. Now think about what that means over 30 days. If someone does absolutely nothing else but brings their vitamin D levels from deficient to optimal, say from 15 NmL to somewhere around 50 or 60 NmL, they could dramatically slow down or even halt muscle breakdown. And that's not theoretical. Multiple studies have shown that individuals with adequate vitamin D status maintain more lean mass during periods of inactivity compared to those who are deficient. In fact, in some cases, they even maintain their greater neuromuscular strength, which is exactly what protects you from injury, fatigue, and long-term degeneration. This is a critical insight, especially for people who struggle with consistency. Maybe you're going through a busy season. Maybe life hits hard and you can't keep up with workouts. The common fear is, I'm going to lose all my progress. But if you're dialing in this one variable, vitamin D, you're giving your body biological permission to hold the line. You're telling your nervous system, stay ready. You're keeping the anabolic environment alive inside your muscle tissue, even without the usual mechanical stimulus of lifting weights. And this leads to another overlooked benefit, motivation. Because one of the side effects of vitamin D deficiency is a drop in dopamine tone. That drop makes everything feel harder, getting up in the morning, sticking to your habits, showing up with energy. With optimal vitamin D, dopamine regulation improves, which means the neural circuits responsible for drive, reward, and daily momentum stay intact. You don't just protect your muscles, you protect the willpower that keeps you moving forward. None of this means vitamin D is magic. It's not a shortcut to strength or a replacement for movement, but it's a foundational piece. Without it, the entire neuromuscular system becomes compromised. With it, you activate a cascade of biological processes that keep your muscles functional, your brain sharp, and your energy stable, even when everything else gets disrupted. And that's why if you do nothing else for the next 30 days, no intense workouts, no complicated programs, make sure this one molecule is working for you, not against you. Because one vitamin can absolutely make the difference between breakdown and breakthrough. It's easy to underestimate how quietly efficiency can destroy strength. We often think of muscle loss as something that happens with age or during long periods of bed rest, or maybe from skipping the gym too many times. But the truth is, your body is constantly either building or breaking down muscle tissue. It never stays neutral. And one of the silent killers of muscle integrity is vitamin D deficiency. You don't feel it right away. It doesn't announce itself with sharp pain or dramatic symptoms. But over days, weeks, and certainly over a month, that deficiency begins to reprogram your biology. Here's what's actually happening beneath the surface. When vitamin D levels drop, it disrupts the process of muscle protein synthesis, the cellular mechanism that helps repair and grow muscle tissue after use. This process is highly dependent on hormonal signaling. Without adequate vitamin D, the genes responsible for muscle growth aren't expressed efficiently. The machinery is there, the blueprint exists, but the activation switch is dimmed. So instead of using the protein from your meals to rebuild stronger muscle fibers, your body starts using it inefficiently or not at all. Muscle cells weaken. They shrink. And in extreme cases, they even die off, a process known as muscle atrophy. But that's just one part of the story. The second problem is neuromuscular degradation. Vitamin D plays a role in how neurons communicate with muscle fibers. And when it's low, the signaling becomes noisy and unreliable. Think about it like trying to send a text message with a weak Wi-Fi signal. It might go through, but it might get delayed. Or worse, it might not reach its destination at all. That's what's happening between your brain and your muscles when vitamin D is deficient. The message is weak. You tell your body to move, to lift, to stabilize, but the response is slow, sometimes uncoordinated. You feel tired, but it's not just fatigue. It's a biological disconnect. And here's the thing most people don't realize. This doesn't only apply to people who are sedentary. Even people who work out consistently, who lift weights and try to stay active, can be losing muscle in the background. If they're low on vitamin D, you can be putting in the work and still be in a deficit. That's the deceptive nature of it. You think you're doing everything right, training, eating clean, prioritizing protein, but your progress plateaus or reverses and it's confusing. In reality, the internal environment of your body isn't optimized to hold on to lean mass. You're fighting your own chemistry. Now imagine someone who's already on the edge. Maybe they've been inactive due to injury, or they're going through a stressful time and can't train. That's when the damage accelerates. Vitamin D deficiency doesn't just make you feel sluggish, it actively amplifies catabolism, the breakdown of tissue. And muscle isn't the only casualty. Metabolism slows, insulin sensitivity worsens, and body composition starts to shift, not necessarily in obvious ways at first, but with enough time, it becomes visible. That's when people say, I lost all my tone, or I just feel weak lately. But by then, they're trying to reverse a month's worth of hormonal imbalance. One of the most compelling findings in recent literature is that vitamin D deficiency is strongly correlated with increased risk of falls and fractures, even in younger populations. Why? Because weak muscles can't stabilize joints properly, and poor neuromuscular function means slower reflexes. All of this begins with one invisible factor, a vitamin we often forget unless someone mentions bone health. But again, this isn't about bones. It's about functional strength and keeping the body resilient in all environments, whether you're lifting in the gym, walking upstairs, or recovering from injury. What's powerful about this insight is how preventable it all is. The average person thinks of muscle loss as inevitable, something that comes with age or inactivity. But in so many cases, it's just a deficiency, a reversible one. And when you correct that deficiency, even in the absence of a full training program, the body holds on to strength more effectively. It maintains lean tissue. It preserves neurological communication. It doesn't panic and start eating away at muscle to fuel other processes. Instead, it functions from a place of stability and conservation. That's what optimal vitamin D status gives you. And look, it doesn't take much to get into a deficient state. One rainy season without sun exposure, 1 month of poor nutrition, chronic stress, inflammation, gut issues, they all interfere with vitamin D absorption or conversion, which means deficiency is common even in people think they're healthy. That's why testing is critical. You can't guess. You have to know where your levels are and then supplement accordingly. Because if you're walking around with suboptimal levels for weeks or months, your body is quietly breaking down something it worked hard to build. Muscle isn't just about vanity or strength. It's your metabolic currency. It's your defense against insulin resistance, obesity, osteoporosis, and chronic fatigue. It's your safety net as you age. And vitamin D is one of the most accessible tools to protect it. No gym required, no special equipment, just a few thousand IUs a day taken consistently with fat to improve absorption, and your body begins to shift back into balance. So when we say 30 days, 1 vitamin, no muscle loss, we're not exaggerating. We're describing a biological reality, because without vitamin D, muscle loss isn't just possible. It's inevitable. But with it, you give your body a fighting chance to stay strong, coordinated, and resistant to breakdown, even when everything else feels off course. One of the most overlooked roles of vitamin D is its influence on hormonal balance, specifically how it protects the hormones responsible for muscle preservation and overall body composition. When we talk about maintaining muscle, most people think purely in terms of calories, protein intake, and lifting weights. And yes, those are essential, but they're not the full picture. You could be hitting your macros perfectly and still be losing lean muscle tissue, all because of one missing variable, the regulation of hormones like testosterone, growth hormone, and even insulin, all of which are influenced directly or indirectly by vitamin D. Let's start with testosterone. Whether you're male or female, testosterone is critical for maintaining and growing lean muscle mass. It stimulates protein synthesis, promotes recovery, and helps regulate fat distribution. What's fascinating is that vitamin D has been shown to act like a molecular switch in testosterone production inside the testes in men and adrenal glands in both sexes. Vitamin D binds to receptors that stimulate the enzymes involved in converting cholesterol into testosterone. So if you're vitamin D deficient, your body literally doesn't have the signal to produce optimal levels of this muscle-preserving hormone. And even if you're producing some, the bioavailability, meaning how well your tissues respond to that hormone, is impaired. That creates a hormonal environment that's tilted toward breakdown rather than preservation, and the issue compounds over time. When testosterone levels fall, your body becomes more sensitive to cortisol, the stress hormone. Cortisol in short bursts is helpful. It mobilizes energy and helps with alertness. But chronically elevated cortisol, that becomes catabolic. It starts eating away at muscle tissue, slows down recovery, impairs sleep, and blunts your anabolic drive. If vitamin D levels are low, not only is testosterone suppressed, but cortisol can become dominant, tipping the hormonal balance in favor of muscle loss. This is why some people train hard, eat well, and still feel like they're getting weaker or softer. The external effort is there, but the internal chemistry is misaligned. Now let's talk about growth hormone and IGF-1. These are major players in tissue regeneration and cellular repair. Vitamin D helps stimulate the release of these growth factors through its interaction with the pituitary gland and peripheral tissues. When vitamin D is optimal, your body is more likely to stay in an anabolic state. That is, a state where it builds up rather than breaks down. But when levels drop, your body senses stress, shifts gears into survival mode, and starts shutting down these regenerative processes. That's why recovery slows. That's why you don't feel as resilient. Your body is deprioritizing muscle preservation in favor of conserving energy. There's also an interesting connection between vitamin D and insulin sensitivity. Most people associate insulin only with blood sugar control, but it also plays a role in nutrient partitioning, meaning where your calories go after you eat. Do they go to your fat cells, or do they get shuttled to your muscle tissue for repair and growth? Vitamin D enhances the ability of your muscle cells to respond to insulin. That means when you eat protein or carbohydrates, your muscles are more likely to absorb those nutrients efficiently, fueling repair and hypertrophy. In contrast, if you're vitamin D deficient, those same nutrients might not be used effectively. Your body stores more as fat and less as functional muscle fuel. This shift in nutrient usage can occur even if your diet is clean and your training is structured. That's how powerful hormonal regulation is. And again, this isn't about dramatic changes overnight. This is about the small, silent shifts that happen inside the body every single day. Over 30 days, those shifts compound. If you're supporting hormonal balance through adequate vitamin D, you give your body a daily signal: preserve lean mass, stay anabolic, regulate fat storage, improve energy use. But if that signal is missing, your body starts making decisions that work against your goals, even if your external behavior hasn't changed. What's often surprising to people is that vitamin D can influence mood and motivation through hormonal pathways as well. A large portion of your dopamine system, the brain circuits that govern drive, pleasure, and motivation, is hormone sensitive. And when your testosterone or IGF-1 levels drop, so does your baseline motivation. You don't just lose muscle strength, you lose psychological momentum. You start skipping workouts, losing interest in food prep, sleeping poorly. But this isn't laziness. It's a chemical result of imbalance. Optimizing vitamin D helps stabilize these hormonal rhythms, which in turn reinforces positive behavior loops. You're more likely to move, to lift, to eat right, not of willpower alone, but because your internal state supports those decisions. And this all comes back to the foundational point. Vitamin D is not just about bone health. It's a master regulator of the hormonal systems that influence everything from how much muscle you retain, to how much energy you produce, to how much drive you feel on a daily basis. Over 30 days, simply correcting a vitamin D deficiency can restore balance to these hormonal systems. And when that balance is restored, the body holds on to muscle like it's supposed to. It doesn't slip into breakdown. It doesn't panic and store fat. It trusts that it's in a stable, supported state and responds accordingly. This is the real science behind the phrase, 1 vitamin, 30 days, no muscle loss. It's not hype. It's the biology of hormonal preservation. And if you understand how to align your body's internal environment with its external actions, that's when the transformation really begins. ChatGPT said when we talk about muscle preservation, most people immediately think of resistance training, protein intake, maybe creatine. But there's something even more foundational, something that determines whether all those strategies actually work in your favor. And that something is how well your body absorbs and utilizes nutrients at the cellular level. This is where vitamin D steps in as a silent architect of performance. It's not just a passive vitamin floating in your bloodstream. It's a signaling molecule. It binds to receptors on almost every tissue in your body, and those receptors regulate how efficiently cells function, including how your muscles take in, store, and use amino acids, glucose, and fatty acids. One of the most powerful, yet under discussed, effects of vitamin D is how it enhances cellular nutrient uptake. Muscle cells aren't just sitting around waiting for protein to float in. They need a specific internal environment, balanced pH, responsive insulin signaling, proper mitochondrial function to actually pull those nutrients into the cell and use them for muscle repair and maintenance. Vitamin D plays a central role in establishing that environment. It upregulates the expression of genes involved in nutrient transport, which means that your muscle fibers become more efficient at pulling in the raw materials they need for growth. Without sufficient vitamin D, that uptake is sluggish. Protein stays in the bloodstream longer. Recovery slows. Adaptation falters. That's why people can be training hard, eating clean, supplementing with everything under the sun, and still not see the gains they expect. It's not about more inputs. It's about better absorption. If your cellular machinery isn't operating efficiently, your body treats even the best diet like background noise. But when you restore optimal vitamin D levels, those cellular gates open. Nutrients start getting used in the right places at the right time in the right way. Muscle repair speeds up. Recovery becomes more efficient. Fatigue starts to fade. All because the cells are finally getting what they need, and more importantly, they know how to use it. Let's take mitochondria, for example. These are the power plants of your cells, especially muscle cells, which are incredibly energy demanding. Mitochondria require precise signaling to produce ATP, the energy currency your body runs on. Vitamin D has been shown to improve mitochondrial density and function, which means your muscles have more access to clean, sustainable energy. That doesn't just help with strength output or endurance. It also helps with recovery because it reduces the buildup of metabolic waste products like lactic acid that can contribute to muscle soreness and breakdown. When your cells can clear waste faster and produce energy more efficiently, they can stay in an anabolic state longer. And over 30 days, that translates into real, measurable muscle preservation. There's also the matter of calcium regulation inside the muscle cell. Most people associate calcium with bones, but in reality, calcium is essential for muscle contraction. It acts as the spark plug that triggers the muscle fiber to contract. But if calcium isn't being properly regulated, and vitamin D is the key player in making sure it is, then your muscle function becomes erratic. That means poor contractions, less strength, greater fatigue, and slower recovery. In practical terms, that's how people end up training consistently and still feeling weaker over time. It's not a willpower issue. It's cellular dysfunction caused by a micronutrient imbalance. Now, when vitamin D levels are optimized, calcium is regulated with precision. The muscles contract and relax exactly when they're supposed to. Your nervous system communicates more efficiently with your musculature. This improved neuromuscular communication means your muscles fire more effectively during every rep, every sprint, every movement. And that matters because more effective contractions signal the body to maintain and even build muscle rather than letting it atrophy. That process doesn't take months to kick in. It can start happening within weeks. That's why we say 1 vitamin, 30 days, no muscle loss. The science isn't built on fluff. It's built on measurable improvements in cellular performance. And the absorption story doesn't stop at the muscles. Think about your gut, your primary nutrient gateway. The cells lining your digestive tract are also influenced by vitamin. They use it to maintain tight junctions, which are the structures that decide what gets absorbed into your bloodstream and what doesn't. A healthy gut lining is what allows you to actually absorb the protein, vitamins, minerals, and fatty acids that fuel muscle maintenance. When vitamin D is low, the integrity of that lining can weaken. You become more susceptible to inflammation, malabsorption, and a condition known as leaky gut, where undigested food particles and toxins slip into the bloodstream and create systemic inflammation. That inflammation can impair recovery, blunt adaptation, and make your body more prone to catabolic processes. But when you restore vitamin D, the gut barrier strengthens, absorption improves, and the entire system starts working again as it's designed to. There's also a metabolic layer to all this. Muscle is an incredibly metabolically active tissue. It burns calories even at rest, supports insulin sensitivity, and helps regulate overall energy balance. But the metabolic activity of your muscle is determined not just by how much you have, but by how well it functions. And once again, vitamin D enhances that function. It helps increase the density of glucose transporters on the muscle cell surface, which means your muscles pull in more glucose post-workout to refill glycogen stores. That's not just good for performance. It's essential for keeping muscle tissue alive and metabolically active. Without that glucose replenishment, your muscles enter a low energy state. They start to degrade, and you start to lose what you worked so hard to build. All of this illustrates a central pointing muscle preservation isn't just about the muscles themselves. It's about how every system in the body interacts with your musculature, your hormones, your digestion, your mitochondria, your nutrient absorption. And vitamin D sits at the center of that network, orchestrating how these systems talk to each other. When it's missing, the conversation breaks down. But when it's present, even in a single, consistent daily dose over 30 days, the body realigns itself. The machinery comes back online, and muscle preservation stops being a struggle and starts becoming the default. This is how one small shift, reintroducing a single critical nutrient, can create an entire internal environment that says, hold on to this muscle, protect it, use it. And when that message is sent clearly, consistently, every day, the results are no longer a question of effort, they're a question of alignment. When we're talking about preventing muscle loss over time, especially over a span as short as 30 days, there's something we have to look at that often gets misheated: inflammation. Not the kind that comes from an injury or an obvious illness, but the low grade chronic inflammation that builds up over time from stress, poor sleep, nutrient imbalances, or even overtraining. That kind of inflammation doesn't scream at you, it whispers. And those whispers show up in the form of fatigue, poor recovery, stalled strength, joint stiffness, and eventually muscle breakdown. Here's the truth: your muscles are highly sensitive to your internal environment. They're constantly receiving signals from your immune system, your nervous system, your endocrine system. And when those signals become distorted or inflamed, your body no longer prioritizes muscle preservation. It prioritizes survival. It starts breaking down muscle proteins to fuel the immune response. And this is where a vitamin, specifically vitamin D, makes a profound impact, because it doesn't just support bone health or immune health or cellular energy. It also helps regulate the very inflammation that causes your body to shift into catabolic states. Vitamin D works on a genetic level to reduce the expression of pro-inflammatory cytokines. These are small signaling proteins like interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha that promote muscle breakdown when they're elevated. In small, acute doses after a workout, they're fine. They even play a role in repair. But when they stay elevated chronically, they damage tissues, impair recovery, and create a hostile environment for muscle retention. Vitamin D acts like a thermostat. When it's at optimal levels, it turns down the volume on those inflammatory signals, keeping the body in a balanced, recovery-friendly state. But the influence goes deeper. Inflammation isn't just about muscle. It also impacts your brain. Chronic inflammation can interfere with neurotransmitter production, especially dopamine and serotonin, which regulate motivation, drive, and consistency. So, if you've ever felt unmotivated to work out, even though you know you should, or found it harder to stick with a plan when your body just felt off, might not be mental weakness. That could be neuroinflammation. And one of the things that modulates inflammation in the brain is, again, vitamin D. It crosses the blood-brain barrier and helps stabilize the brain's immune cells, the microglia. When those cells are calm, your brain works better, your mood stabilizes, your decision-making sharpens, and you're far more likely to stay consistent with the behaviors that preserve muscle. Now think about that ripple effect. If vitamin D helps reduce inflammation in your muscles and your brain, it's essentially defending your entire recovery system. You sleep better. You train smarter. Your protein synthesis improves. You have fewer H's and less downtime. That 30-day window becomes more than just maintenance. It becomes optimization, because you're not spending that time fighting internal fires. You're building. And for people who are aging or dealing with hormonal shifts or just going through a period of life where physical stress is higher than usual, this becomes even more critical. Inflammation becomes more persistent as we age. Hormonal drops, especially in testosterone and growth hormone, already lower the body's anabolic signals. If you add inflammation on top of that, muscle loss accelerates. But if you can reduce that baseline inflammation through something as accessible as correcting a vitamin D deficiency, you give your body a chance to respond positively to even modest training and nutrition efforts. You give it room to grow, or at least hold on. There's another layer to this as well, and that's recovery speed. A lot of people don't realize that inflammation delays recovery not just by damaging tissue, but by interrupting the cell signaling that initiates repair. Muscle fibers don't just heal on their own. They rely on a cascade of messages, chemical, hormonal, and genetic, that say, it's time to rebuild. But when inflammation is high, that cascade gets blocked. It's like trying to send an email with a slow internet connection. It might go through, but it'll take a lot longer, and sometimes it won't even arrive. Vitamin D clears that line of communication. It helps ensure that the repair process starts on time, finishes fully, and doesn't leave behind lingering weakness or soreness that makes you pull back from your next workout. And again, all of this ties back to a simple truth. Your internal chemistry determines your physical outcomes. If you're inflamed on the inside, you can't perform on the outside. If your recovery is compromised, your gains are compromised. So muscle loss isn't just about whether you're training or eating right. It's about whether your body is in a physiological state that even allows for preservation. Now, none of this happens overnight, but the beauty of vitamin D and why this conversation matters so much is that it begins to restore balance relatively quickly. Within days to weeks of repleting low vitamin D levels, inflammation markers begin to drop, sleep improves, mood lifts, and the downstream effects on muscle retention become noticeable, often without making any other dramatic lifestyle changes. That's what makes it so powerful. It's not that it does the work for you. It's that it clears the path so your efforts aren't wasted. If you're training, eating well, and still struggling with fatigue, soreness, or slow results, this could be the missing piece. And for those who aren't able to train hard due to injury schedule or other responsibilities, this becomes even more valuable. It offers a way to prevent decline during those periods of pause because muscle loss doesn't wait for a convenient time. But neither does recovery. And if you arm your body with the right tools, even something as overlooked as a single vitamin, you can tip the scales back in your favor. This isn't about adding complexity to your life. It's about removing the silent friction points that keep you from holding on to the muscle you've built. One of the most invisible but most damaging of points is unchecked inflammation. And the body has a built-in regulator. When you restore it, you don't just reduce muscle loss. You reclaim control. So far, we've talked about mechanisms, how inflammation, hormonal signaling, and vitamin D all converge to either protect or deteriorate muscle tissue. But there's another factor that glues all of this together and determines whether your efforts are actually translating into results. That factor is consistency. Because here's the hard truth: your body doesn't respond to what you do occasionally. It responds to what you do regularly. And this is especially true when it comes to preventing muscle loss. You can have the best nutrition plan, the most well-designed training program, and even the ideal supplementation strategy, but if it's not applied consistently over time, the benefits dissipate. That's why this one vitamin, vitamin D, can have such a profound impact when it's maintained consistently over 30 days. Not just because of its biochemical effects, but because it supports the very behaviors and rhythms that keep your body in an anabolic muscle-preserving state. Let's break it down. First, vitamin D directly impacts your circadian rhythm, your internal clock. When your circadian rhythm is aligned, your sleep-wake cycles are stable, your hormone release patterns are optimized, and your recovery window is predictable. All of that matters when you're trying to maintain muscle. Cortisol, for example, naturally peaks in the morning and drops at night. If your circadian rhythm is disrupted, cortisol can remain elevated throughout the day, putting you in a catabolic state and making it harder to retain muscle mass. Consistently adequate vitamin D levels help reinforce that rhythm, especially when paired with early morning sunlight or even just getting outside regularly. That circadian support then spills into your motivation, focus, and physical readiness, allowing you to train more consistently and recover more predictably. Second, let's talk about how vitamin D influences mood. People often underestimate the role that emotional state plays in physical outcomes. When mood is low, when you're feeling anxious, depressed, or simply drained, adherence to routine slips. Workouts get skipped. Meals become inconsistent. Sleep suffers. And those little cracks in the routine widen over time, making it easier for muscle to decline. Vitamin D helps regulate the synthesis of serotonin and dopamine, two neurotransmitters crucial for drive, consistency, and reward processing. When dopamine is functioning properly, you're more likely to follow through even on the hard days. When serotonin is in balance, your mood is more stable and stress is easier to manage. That mental clarity, driven by consistent vitamin D levels, can be the thing that keeps you showing up even when progress feels slow or invisible. There's also a behavioral feedback loop to consider. When you're taking care of yourself, when you're supplementing wisely, training with purpose, and tracking progress, you start to build identity. You start to think of yourself as someone who maintains discipline, who invests in their health, who doesn't let muscle slip away just because life gets busy. That sense of identity strengthens over time. It becomes its own form of motivation. And what's interesting is that vitamin D, through its effects on mood, energy, and even immune resilience, makes it easier to build and protect that identity. It gives you the physiological support to reinforce those behaviors, to feel the benefit of consistency, and to keep momentum moving forward even when external motivation is low. There's no magic in a single dose. The power comes from repetition. The body responds to signals. When you're consistent, especially with something as foundational as vitamin D, you're sending a steady signal to the body: protect this muscle, prioritize repair, regulate hormones, keep the brain sharp, and that signal repeated day after day starts to take root. You're not just preventing loss anymore. You're creating conditions where muscle can thrive. Even if you're not in a full-on bulking phase, even if you're traveling, even your training intensity fluctuates. Now, People often ask, what if I miss a few days? Or is it really that big of a deal? And the answer, Izzy, is it's not about perfection, it's about trend. One missed day won't undo everything. But if missing becomes the norm, if the pattern is disrupted long enough, the body notices. You may not feel it right away, but it shows up in subtle ways: slower recovery, reduced energy, poorer performance. And then the mind starts to follow. You start rationalizing more skipped sessions, more off-plan meals. It becomes easier to accept the decline. That's why this key point, consistency, is arguably the most important. It's what holds the rest of the protocol together. It's the framework. It's the discipline that activates the benefit of every other piece we've talked about. What's powerful here is that vitamin D actually supports consistency itself. It helps build the biological and psychological conditions that make consistency easier. That's not something you get from every supplement. Most compounds work downstream. They help once everything else is in place. But vitamin D works upstream. It stabilizes the system. It gives you the platform from which consistent behavior is even possible. So when you think about this 30-day window, don't think about it as a short-term fix. Think of it as a recalibration. A reset. 30 days of consistent vitamin D doesn't just protect your muscles. It changes your baseline. It puts your body in a state where doing the right things feels more natural, more rewarding, and more sustainable. And from there, the muscle you keep is just the beginning. The real win is becoming the kind of person who doesn't lose momentum, who doesn't slide backward, who builds a foundation of health that compounds over time. Consistency isn't glamorous. It's not loud or dramatic, but it's what makes transformation stick.